Okay, so my first question, which I always ask everybody, is who are you and what makes your opinions important?
Okay. First, I'm Jerry Brainum. I've been around the bodybuilding game for, oh God, it's been almost 50 years actually. I started when I was very young. I was the editor of Muscle and Fitness magazine, science editor for 10 years in the 90s. I've been writing for Iron Man, the American edition, for since 1986, I believe. I've had about 4,500 articles published. I've worked with about maybe 30 or 40 elite professional athletes, including about 12 world champion boxers and MMA fighters. And what else do you need to know?
That's a pretty solid answer there, my man. That's a good one. Okay, so kind of get into the first kind of area of questions I've got for you. Obviously, because you've been around the bodybuilding scene for a long time, and I guess if I'm right in thinking you kind of got involved towards the late 60s, is that right? Is that when you started working out, like 1968, 69?
I actually started working on 1962.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Okay.
I arrived in California in '68, though, and I arrived a little bit before Arnold, and I actually know Arnold very well. I met him, about a week after he arrived in the United States, and I worked out in the same gym, the Gold's Gym. Oh, well, we worked out together at Vince's gym originally. That was in 1968, and that was in Studio City. There no longer exists, this gym. And then Arnold first moved over to Gold's Gym in Venice, the original Gold's Gym. I followed over there about maybe a month after he did. So we'd work out and hang out together in the let's say, late 60s, early 70s, all the way into the, I'd say, late 70s. And then Arnold, and of course, then Arnold kind of took off, and I didn't see him much after that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to ask you, obviously, people talk a lot about what they call the golden era of bodybuilding and that kind of 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe early 80s period.
Right.
And I guess looking back, kind of in the last century, you've got two kind of key moments in time. I guess at the turn of the century, you come towards the end of what we would call, I guess, physical culture. So you've got people like, Eugene Sandow, Juge Hackenschmidt, the Saxton Trio, Edward Aston, people like that. And then you kind of fast forward into the kind of, the 50s, 60s, 70s. You've got people like Boyko, Larry Scott, Steve Reeves, obviously Columbo, Arnold, all those guys. What is it, do you think, about specifically maybe the golden era of bodybuilding in the 50s, 60s and 70s? What do you think it is that holds the allure for a lot of people when they talk about it? Obviously they always talk about it as a great moment in time. What do you think lends to that?
I think possibly that a lot of these guys, well, for example, you had, if you look at the Steve Reeves era, I mean, you had a lot of, these guys, basically, it was before the so-called advent of drugs and anabolics and all that stuff. And, these guys basically built their physiques naturally, and, they had a type of body that a lot of people can relate to, rather than some of the bigger guys today. And I'm not trying to demean the current bodybuilders. It was just a different era, a different style of physique. And there wasn't really a lot of people involved in bodybuilding back then. So, today you have so much more guys that the genetic pool is greater. So you're going to produce greater, quote unquote, freak type physiques. But I think there was, it's in a lure, like Steve Reeves, for example, as you know, he went on to make movies, the Hercules movies, and he became known to the general public. As far as the earlier era, I mean, these guys were like Eugene Sandow II. They were into strength feats. In those days, you had to have more than a body. You had to do something with it. You had to do strength feats. Of course, Eugene Sandow also posed. He was kind of your first bodybuilder, really. But I mean, he was also, competed in a lifting contest, and he did feats of strength, and that was. And people look back at that in fascination. Some of these lifts that they did, their one hand clean and jerk and all that stuff. I mean, you don't see that anymore. And a lot of people and it sounds like I'm getting the impression that you're one of them. You're fascinated by those eras. That it's kind of like a bygone era, and you just don't see this stuff anymore. So I think that holds a lot of allure for people also. And these were interesting characters too. I mean, I've read biographies of Sandow, and I've read about the Saxon brothers, some of the other strongmen, George Hackenschmidt. They were all very interesting characters. I mean, they all had kind of like unique personalities. So they stood out among themselves for more than having just a body. They were actually very interesting people. So if you're into the history, you know that.
Beautiful. Okay. So obviously, because you're around, in that environment, I mean, what was it like to witness some of the key moments and kind of the environment, the training environment when you were at Vince's and obviously Gold's gym? And what was the environment like in the gym back then?
Okay, well, let's start with Vince's gym. I can tell you the first time I walked into Vince's, well, I'd known about Vince's gym. I actually came from New York, and I was training with a guy who had actually gone out to Vince's gym, and this was in the mid-'60s. He'd taken a lot of Vince's training principles and brought it back. For example, I remember doing what today is called crunch sit-ups. I was doing that around 1965 before anyone ever heard of crunch sit-ups. In those days, everybody was doing the kind of standard sit-up where you'd hook your feet on an abdominal board and you do a full sit-up. But Vince was advocating crunch sit-ups as an isolation effect for the abdominals. And I started, this friend of mine brought all these techniques back, and they worked fantastic for me. I was just getting into bodybuilding, and I decided that I wanted to move out to California myself. So when the time arose for me to move out to California to go to college, that's what I did. I moved out to California, and I went right to Vince's gym. But the funny part of the story is my friend had advised me that Vince was kind of a strange character, and you had to kind of deal with his personality. It's kind of an eccentric character. Super knowledgeable guy. I still, to this day, believe he was years ahead of his time. But anyway, he said to me, for example, he said, Vince, when you first meet Vince, he's going to insult you. But you can't take it personally. You have to just laugh and go along with it. So sure enough, I walked in the gym. I remember I didn't have a car yet. So I took a bus to the gym, and I walked in, and I was wearing a full sweatsuit. And Vince said to me, he says, hey, kid, how'd you get here? And I said, well, I took the bus. And he went over, he sniffed my sweatsuit, and he said, I bet you didn't have any trouble getting a seat on the bus. Of course, my reaction, so I've been forewarned, was to just laugh. And he liked that. We became good buddies there. I used to sit in the front and talk with him all the time. I mean, Vince is the kind of guy, if you ever hear the old adage, that you either love him or hate him. I'm in the category of loving Vince. I thought Vince was just a fantastic, and oh my God, he had so much knowledge about nutrition and bodybuilding. I learned a tremendous amount of information from him. But Vince's gym itself was a small, dark gym. It was one room, and it was surprisingly small. I, for some reason, expected a bigger gym. And he had a lot of unique equipment, a lot of unique pulleys. And, as a bodybuilding fan, I remember walking in there one day in the late afternoon, and who would I see training was the preeminent bodybuilder of the day, a guy named Larry Scott, who was actually the original winner of the Mr. Olympia. I believe it was 1965, and then he won again in 1966. He was working out there, and my jaw dropped when I saw this guy, because, I mean, he was in terrific condition. And then another interesting aspect of the gym was it was right across the street from a major movie studio called Universal Studios. As a consequence, you had just about every major movie star and TV star of the day actually trained in Vince's gym. So I was in this gym with all these guys that I saw on TV all the time. I mean, I remember there was one guy. They were all terrific guys. I never bothered them. That was the key. You can't bother them when they're training. Some guys were friendlier than others. I remember one unfriendly guy was a guy named Robert Blake, who was doing a show called Beretta at the time. He was a major TV star. It might have been before Beretta. But the thing I remember about him was he was a very sullen, unfriendly guy. So I wasn't surprised years ago when he was actually arrested for murdering his wife. He got acquitted, but in other words, he always not a nice guy. But most of the guys were very friendly. And I remember coming into Vince's gym one day, and Vince said to me, "Hey Jerry, this guy from Europe is coming in today. His name is Schwarzenegger." And I said, "Oh, I think he means Schwarzenegger, Vince. I saw some photos. He's like something like 19, 20 years old, and he's tremendous. This guy has I think he's already won a Miss Universe or something." And so sure enough, about an hour later, who walks in but Arnold? And I remember he comes up to Vince and he says, "I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Universe." And Vince looked at him, looked up and down, and Arnold was kind of a big, bulky guy, and Vince says to him, "Well, you just look like a big fat fuck to me." Beautiful. Arnold's jaw dropped. I tell you, the thing is, he looked like he was about to start crying because everybody had kind of like, really put this guy on a pedestal, Arnold. I mean, he was 20 years old. He was already Mr. Universe. And I kind of took him aside, and I befriended him, and I told he was speaking broken English in those days. He didn't understand a lot of English words. But I took him aside. I said, listen, don't take it personal. I said, this is kind of like a trial by fire. And I had to explain what the term means. He didn't understand. I said, Vince does this to everybody. I told him the story what he did to me about the sweatsuit. I said, don't take it personal. And, he understood that. And, he worked out a little bit. But Vince kept on berating him. He just wouldn't let loose on the guy. And in those days, Arnold just took it too personal. And after a while, he just couldn't take it. So that's when he decided to move to Gold's Gym. And also there was another reason, is that Vince's gym was set up to kind of abide to Vince's training principles. Like, he didn't like doing heavy bench presses. He didn't like doing squats. He preferred like hack squat machines, isolation exercises. And Arnold wanted to do squats because his legs were his weak point back then. So, that's actually one of the main reason he actually moved to Gold's was because Gold's had the kind of heavy equipment that he wanted to use. They had the big heavy calf machines. They had the squat racks. So he moved over there. I went over there later with my training partner because we also wanted to do a greater variety of exercises. And I wound up, staying at Gold's Gym. I've been there ever since. I'm still a member to this day after all these years. I've seen it evolve quite a bit over the years. It went from the original Gold's Gym where Pumping Iron was filmed. That was on Pacific Avenue. It was just one big room. Then it moved to, I believe it moved after that to a 2nd Street in Santa Monica. And then it moved after that to its present location, which is in Venice, near Rose Avenue. And it expanded where it's now. It's about, it's about 3 or 4 huge rooms. It's like 10 times the size of the original Gold's. But I can tell you that the atmosphere is not the same. The original Gold's, it was basically all hardcore guys. But the interesting thing about it, everybody was serious about the trend. We had all the top guys there, Arnold, Robbie Robinson. I mean, the guys would come in from out of town. All the guys who started Pumping Iron would train there. But, we all trained seriously, but there was like always a humor in the air. We always used to joke around with each other. It was actually fun to train there. And, you'd walk in the gym and, some days you just don't feel like working out, whatever. Maybe you're low on energy, you're under stress or whatever. There was something about Gold's Gym, the original, when you walked in there, you immediately, it was something in the air, you just wanted to train. No matter how out of mood you were, as soon as you walked in there, you hit the workout. And it was just a fun place to train. There was no music. There was just a radio, an old beat-up radio sitting on a broken-down desk in the front of the gym. I mean, there was an old water fountain that constantly, all year round, the water was warm, was like bath water. It was warm. It was terrible. And they had this upstairs, they had a little locker room upstairs. No lockers, just a coat rack where you'd hang your clothes. They had a bathroom with no door on it, just a commode with no door. And then they had a shower room, again, no door. And they had a sauna room that nobody ever used. And there was a funny story for a while. See, Joe Gold didn't allow women to train there, but these 2 women decided to train anyway. They joined the gym. And Joe Gold was out of town. He was working in the Merchant Marine in those days, so he was very rarely around in the old days. He would have people watch the gym. And these girls started working out there. I remember one was a short blonde girl. If you look at the film Pumping Iron, I think she has a brief appearance in that movie. And then there was another one who was a very tall redhead. And I remember the redhead was interesting because she was about 6'2". She was actually quite attractive, but she was very raw, if you understand what I'm saying. She like didn't shave her legs, and she had this thick hair under her arm and stuff. And she would work out, and then she'd go right up into the the shower room, which was supposed to be for men only. And she would just strip down and start taking a shower with guys standing there. And I remember one time I came up there. I was in the bathroom sitting on the toilet, and she came right in. I mean, there was no door, and started combing her hair. I mean, this is a person I never met. In those days, I was embarrassed by that type of incident, But that's the kind of places the original Gold's Gym was. Very interesting place. Today, Gold's Gym, I compare it to about the best analogy I could use. You could say that the original Gold's was like a small town, whereas today the current Gold's Gym, it's a fantastic gym, don't get me wrong. The equipment's terrific, but it's kind of like a big city. I mean, you could walk by people every day, and this happens, and not say a word to them day after day, year after year. That's the way it is today. It's okay with me, because I have different goals these days than back then. I was a hardcore bodybuilder. I was into competition. Today, it's a question of pure health. I'm just trying to maintain health, stay in good shape, keep my cardiovascular system, and prevent disease. So my goals have changed. So it really, the point is, it doesn't really make a difference who trains there right now, as far as I'm concerned. In fact, I train so late at night that there's actually very few bodybuilders there at night. So it's just regular people, basically.
Okay, that's cool. So kind of going back to that time you ran kind of Arnold and all those guys. I mean, how did they? How was training organised then? Do they? I mean, obviously now people talk about periodization. It's very complicated. You've got different phases, different goals and stuff. I mean, how did the guys approach it back then? Did they approach it as complicated, or was it a lot simpler, do you think, with their training?
It was a lot simpler. Basically, like, for example, let's take Arnold, for example. And most of them trained in a similar manner to Arnold. They trained 6 days a week, and each muscle group was hit twice a week. And before a contest, Arnold would, he had a problem with training legs. Legs were very hard for him to train. They would just completely exhaust him. So before a contest, Arnold would always do a morning workout, train a couple of minor body parts, and then he'd come back in the late afternoon. He'd go eat something, lie on the beach after the morning workout. Then he'd come back in the afternoon and train legs by themselves. That was only before a contest, though. So he would train, the basic pattern was to train 6 days a week. Usually it'd be like chest and back the first day, legs the second day, third day would be shoulders and arms. And then you would repeat the cycle and then rest on Sundays, right? Now, off season, this is where a lot of the magazines go wrong, because they give the impression that the guys would train this way all year round. I mean, I get a kick out of reading these articles where it talks about Arnold training 12 hours a day. Nonsense. Complete nonsense. In the off season, we had a term. We called it the Frank Zane workout. You of course probably heard of Frank Zane. He's one of the guys in the gym. And what Frank would do is, when he wasn't, he was a teacher in those days. He was teaching junior high school math. When he wasn't preparing for a contest, he would come in about 2 to 3 times, maybe 4 times a week at the most, and his workout would be maybe 25 minutes. He'd do just a very toning workout and leave. And after a while, all the guys kind of duplicate, including Arnold. Arnold would come in and do maybe a full calf workout and do maybe 4 or 5 sets for a couple of body parts, and he'd be out of there in a half hour. And he'd only train about 4 times a week. And this is the way it was done in the off season. But about 3 months before the contest, everybody got serious. Like the frequency went from 4 to 6 days a week. Average workout was 2 hours. There was no aerobics done, by the way. There was I think there was a rusty old bike in the gym, a stationary bike that nobody ever used. There was no running, no jogging, nothing. Everybody depended on diet. Not a bit of aerobics done in those days. Oh, so, that's, but when there was a contest, there was still a little bit of joking, kibitzing around between sets, but everybody would kind of train really hard, really fast. And I know that Arnold, when you train with Arnold, he really forced you to train hard. I mean, when you wanted to stop at, let's say, the 7th rep, he forced you to do 10 reps. I remember he was doing 6 sets of every thigh exercise he did, and my legs actually responded very well, and they would be dead after 3 or 4 sets. I'd say, listen, Arnold, I can't do 6 sets. I'm not feeling anything. They're numb. He'd say, no, you have to do it. You'd have to do it. And so I do the 6 sets, but it was always too much for me, because I just didn't. He needed more volume than me. I didn't need that much weight for my legs. He still is a fun guy, Arnold.
So you mentioned it there as well. I mean, how did they go along with the training? I mean, how did they structure the diet as well? Did they? I mean, obviously now people talk about kind of calories, macros, certain foods, food intolerant testing. It's quite a complex process now. I mean, how did the guys eat back then? Did they have like a set diet they would work out, or would they just stick to foods they knew that worked for them?
I'll tell you, there was 2 basic diets back then. What Arnold would do is Arnold would continue to eat basically the same way, but he would just reduce the quantity he would eat. And if he felt like having an ice cream every couple of days or some so-called junk food, he would do it and not worry about it. He would eat like apple pie or strudel, or he'd have some ice cream. I mean, this is right before the major contests. But the rest of the time, he would basically eat regular meals a couple of times a day. And but all he would do is reduce the portion size. That's it. He didn't cut anything out. And I remember a little trick that Arnold did. In fact, we talked about this not long ago, Arnold and I. I reminded him of this trick. He used to make a protein drink. He would use a standard protein powder, and he would put in he put in a little bit of, I don't remember if it was rum or whiskey. He would put it in just a little shot into the protein drink. And I remember asking him about that. And his belief was that adding a little bit of alcohol actually increased the protein uptake. And I reminded him that he remembered doing that. Arnold has a tremendous memory. He remembers everything he did. And he actually recalled doing that. He felt it actually helped his protein uptake. But the other standard diet was basically a low-carb diet, which is what I myself used. I tried just about every diet known to man. It's the only thing that ever really took a lot of body fat off me. So basically, you could say, if you draw a demarcation between the two, the guys with the higher metabolisms, they would get away with eating standard low-calorie diets. Let's say not high carbohydrate, but not low carbohydrate. Let's say moderately high carbohydrate, high protein. The other guys like myself who were sensitive to carbohydrates, we had to go to low carbohydrate. So basically, it was my basic diet involved just two foods really: meat and eggs. That was it. I lived on about let's say 3 pounds of very lean meat with almost no fat. It was pure protein, and eggs. That was it. And another thing I want to quickly add, since we're talking about eggs, is I never ever did that egg white nonsense. And I've written dozens of articles about how it's one of the dumbest things that bodybuilders do is throw out the yolks and eat only the egg whites, because first of all, the protein in an egg is found in the yolk and the egg white, but most of the nutrients, the vast majority of nutrients in the egg are found in the yolk. And there's nothing wrong with yolks. I mean, the fat in the yolk is monounsaturated. I mean, it's the kind of fat that's burned up rapidly when you work out hard. So, they're basically literally throwing out the baby with the bathwater when they throw out the yolk. It's something that I never did, and none of the guys did back then. I mean, very often after the workout, a bunch of us would get together, and we went to a local restaurant which was near the gym. It was called the Germans because it was run by a German family, and it was just a very raw, not a fancy restaurant, but the food was fantastic and the prices were unbeatable. I remember I used to get a 6-egg cheese omelet and coffee, and it cost me $1.25. It was today that same meal would cost in the restaurants around here, that would be about $8-9 today. And it was just a fun place. We'd all go and eat there, and anytime you walk into Germans, there'd always be some top bodybuilders and golds in there. And of course this place went out of business years ago, and that was it. So Arnold, like I say, before a contest, very often he would do a morning workout. He'd go and eat something. He'd lie in the sun, and then he'd go back to the gym and work out again. But mainly that was only to work his legs. Most of the time he just worked out once a day. And so that was basically it. That was the system he used back then.
Oh, wow. Okay, so along the kind of lines of diet, there's going back to Vince Gironda, there's obviously a few things that, as guys are interested in, we kind of read through, and there's kind of like regular themes that come up. One of them is I'm always curious by, is the dissected liver tablets.
Okay. Yeah.
Was there any, I know obviously it was one of the things that Vince kind of recommended, is there actually some science behind that now, or is he off the mark on those ones?
Actually, it's very pertinent that you brought that up, because I should have added when I talked about the diets. We didn't have a large range of supplements in those days. I mean, it was very limited. It was nothing like it is today. I mean, there was no whey proteins. Actually, there was a whey protein, but it was very obscure, and nobody really used it. What we used, we had later on we had milk and egg proteins, but the basic proteins were a lot of them were made from soy, which were very low quality. There was a couple there was one particular protein that was popular. It was called Blair's protein, and it was a milk and egg protein. It was actually still to this day the best tasting protein I've ever tasted. It wasn't that high. It was only actually about 62% protein, but it was the company that made it also sold a coconut extract. And what Larry Scott did, and I tried this, is he take the Blair's protein and he put it in a blender and add heavy cream, and then put in that coconut extract. It would mix up so thick that it would have the consistency of kind of like ice cream almost, and you'd eat it with a spoon. You can't drink it. It was too thick. but it was so delicious that I wound up like eating this like every 2 hours, and actually I started to get fat from it. It wasn't protein; it was the heavy cream. I was like drinking quarts of it. All that fat was putting the weight on me, you know. But to answer your question, desiccated liver tablets, it's true they were advocated by Vince, and I remember he had a technique. He told guys if you wanted to build muscle mass, this is kind of funny. He told them to consume 2 liver tablets every hour that they're awake all day long. Just 2 liver tablets. Now I tried that, and I don't know whether it worked or not. I know that Frank Zane was a very, very big advocate. He used to buy liver tablets in bulk, and for a period for about a year or two, I actually lived next door to him in the next apartment, and I would actually buy liver tablets off him. He used to give them in big cardboard boxes of 10,000 liver tablets at a time. And before a contest, I remember myself, and this was actually popular in those days, I would take as many as 50 to 100 liver tablets a day. Now, if I would have known back then what I know today, I would have done that. I'll tell you why. Because liver is actually very high in iron, and iron, it's not a good idea to take for a man to take a large amount of iron, because normally iron is circulating in the body attached to proteins. But if it becomes displaced from the proteins, then it becomes free iron. And the free iron is very reactive. It can cause free radical damage. It has to do with, the production, the interaction of iron with oxygen in large amounts. But I was very young in those days, so I probably got away with it. The other thing was that when you took that many liver tablets, it gave you a lot of intestinal gas. So in other words, like it was really hard to be around people socially. See, that was another problem. But the truth of the matter is that as a protein source, though, it was actually very good. In fact, right around that time, another popular supplement that you don't see around today was a protein powder made of organ meats. In other words, it had liver, had pancreas, had spleen. It tasted terrible, quite the opposite of the milk and egg protein. It tasted awful. I remember there was a top bodybuilder back then named Chester Yorton, who was the only man, Chet Yorton, the only man who ever beat Arnold. In the 1967 NAB Miss Universe, he actually came out with an organ meat protein. And his was actually not bad. I mean, it was, wouldn't call it tasty, but some of the other ones, there was one called Malabar. I remember Malabar organ protein. It was basically mostly liver powder. So it was awful. I mean, you couldn't disguise the taste. You could put in ice cream, peanut butter. It was awful. And then there was still another kind of protein. It was called protein from the sea. And I always tell people it had the consistency of beach sand, and it tasted like spoiled fish scales. Anybody who took it, 9 out of 10 people who tried to ingest it while getting sick or vomiting within a half hour. So those were the options. So to answer your question, liver tablets were good for its day. You know, it really did have high quality protein. It had a lot of B vitamins in there. But today it's kind of passé, and there really is no reason to use it today unless, for example, one possible use would be women who, a lot of women don't like to eat meat. And meat is the best source of what they call heme iron, which is the most absorbable source of iron. As a consequence, a lot of women are walking around with iron deficiency anemia. Well, since liver is a very good source of this very absorbable iron, if they took liver tablets, it would probably solve the problem. They don't have to take 100 a day like we did. But I mean, that's about the only population I can see using liver tablets today. There's too many other superior supplements. It doesn't make sense to use that today. But again, we didn't have a large choice back then. So in fact, most of the guys hardly used any supplements at all. I mean, nobody used. I mean, maybe vitamin C, vitamin E, and that's about it. All the exotic supplements you see today, none of them nobody even knew about them. I don't think they even existed back then anywhere. So we basically used what we could, and it was very conservative. We didn't use a massive amounts of supplements. We actually did depend on diet for all the nutrients. Just that's what doctors actually recommend today, and we actually did it back then. So that was the way the supplements worked. By the way, Vince Gironda was a big advocate of supplements. It was a large part of his nutritional. He had people taking milk and egg protein. He loved the liver tablets. He had them taking a lot of exotic, special vegetable oils that he would concoct and all that. So he was unusual in that. And this is again where I say he was ahead of his time, because he had an entire supplement program that nobody else gave out. It was unique to him. If you ever get a hold of any of his old writings, you'll see what I mean. He's very big advocate of supplementation, Vince.
Okay. Okay, so moving on. So obviously, since you've been, involved, and obviously you've kind of borne witness to a lot of changes in the industry itself, as well as bodybuilding. I mean, what are some of the biggest developments you've seen from like the 1960s up until now in terms of the industry and the culture that goes with fitness and bodybuilding?
Now, are you talking about, for example, like drug use, that type of thing, or
just in general, what you'd see in the general population? So, I mean, you kind of touched on supplements as one aspect, but I mean, even the way people train, the way gyms are structured. I mean, what are the biggest things that you've seen?
Well, the biggest thing probably I would say is the advent of women involved in fitness and bodybuilding. Because, like I say, when I got into bodybuilding in the '60s, women were, I mean, it was taboo to even go near a weight. Women actually believed if they put their hand on a dumbbell, they would get big biceps. There was a morbid fear of any kind of weight training. Interestingly enough, though, there was a couple of outliers. Like, for example, the famous movie actress Marilyn Monroe was a big weight training advocate. A lot of people don't know she lifted light dumbbells most of the time. I mean, so there was a couple of exceptions to the rule, but most women, were not into weight training at all, because again, they had this horrible fear of they felt that weights would make them big and muscular. So, they didn't realize that, there's other things involved like testosterone and all that. But somehow it evolved where women started kind of going into the gyms, started getting involved. Was movie stars and models started openly lifting weights. And when women saw that, these women were not being masculinized and actually were showing the best bodies of all. See, because a lot of women don't realize that weight training is what shapes the body. Aerobics are great for, toning and burning fat and that type of thing. But to actually get toned and really look sexy, so to speak, you have to be involved in weight training. Again, you're not doing it to get big muscles. And when women, when they realized this, then they started flocking to the gym, to the point where, like, if you go in Gold's Gym today, if you were to walk in there now, you'd probably see a greater population of women than men in most gyms. Because, again, their goal is to basically look good and look fit. So that's one big change. Another big change was the actual equipment itself. Back then when I first got started, the equipment, we had machines, of course, but I remember they were very kind of raw. There wasn't a huge amount of quantity or quality of machines. The machine designs have greatly expanded over the years. I mean, you had the Nautilus line, and you have all these various pulley machines. We basically had basic pulleys, barbells, dumbbells. We had the leg extension, leg curl, and the lat machines, and that was basically it. Today you have all kinds of various machines, various bicep machines, tricep machines, lat machines, special lat machines. You have pec decks and all that stuff. We didn't have that in those days, so that's another major change. And again, the third thing is probably, be quiet, Chip, my dog's barking. The other major change is just the population of the gym itself. It's very heterogeneous. It's homogeneous, I guess you'd call it. There's all kinds of people training. There's there's young people, and there's people like older people. I mean, and of course, there's always the bodybuilders are there too. So it's a huge. Whereas in the old days, it was only very serious people would come to the gym. You didn't have any so-called fitness types going there. Anyone who went to a gym with weights really wanted to be either a bodybuilder or look like a bodybuilder. There was no such thing as staying fit back then. It was a strictly goal-oriented thing. Whereas today, it's a much more broad horizon, so to speak. People with varied goals. Some people are in there for rehab purposes. Some people, for example, might have diabetes or cardiovascular disease. And of course, there's always, again, the population that just wants to look good. And so you have, that's another thing that's a major change. Hey, yo! They're like books, these guys.
Okay. Kind of going on from that.
Hey.
What developments do you think we'll see in the next 5 to 10 years then? Do you think, obviously, bearing witness to all of that before, what sort of changes do you foresee happening over the next 10 years?
It's well, one thing that I've seen that's kind of new is kind of there's almost like a backtrack to, you remember you were mentioning the physiques of yesterday years, like the 40s, the 50s. There seems to be a large element of people, men especially, that kind of like that look up to those physiques, admire the, let's say, the more conservative physique. Whereas, again, you got to give the guys credit today, the pro bodybuilders. I mean, the amount of muscle that they put on is absolutely astounding. Whether they've used steroids or whatever, that's not the point. The point is these guys are, I can think of no other word to call them, but they're freaks. But I mean that in a good way. Because I use freak in the sense that they just stand out so much from everybody else that the physiques look almost unattainable to the average person. And as a consequence, a lot of guys, I guess they sense they don't have the genetics to be like that. Or maybe for some reason they just don't want to look that way. But they want to look muscular, they want to look good. So you have this evolvement of the so-called, I think they call it physique contests now, where they're basically harking back to the physiques of the 50s and the 40s, where they're slimmer, the muscles are smaller, they all have nice abs and stuff like that. And then, of course, in the women, you have the backtrack from instead of hardcore female bodybuilders, you now have fitness girls. You have, the bikini girls. I don't know what maybe I'm using the term wrong. Almost like beauty contests, really. But they still look they're a little bit more fit. They're a little bit more toned than the kind of Miss Universe girls. They look like they exercise, but they're not really muscular. So this is the trend now. In other words, I don't want to say that bodybuilding is going down, but I think the best way to describe it, it's always been a kind of a niche activity. It's kind of, I don't want to call it a cult. It attracts a certain number of people. I think it's always going to be that way, because, I mean, you look at the Marvel comics and the superheroes, these guys still look like bodybuilders. And as long as they're going to, super heroic people are going to be portrayed as having large muscles, or G.I. Joe, I mean, he looks like a bodybuilder now. He used to be a skinny little soldier. Now he's like, he looks like he's on 14 shots of Dianabol or something. But I mean, as long as you have that in the media, it's going to always attract the certain people who say, hey, I want to look that way. I want to look muscular. But they're going to be in the minority, as they always were. Whereas a lot of people, again, they want to be fit. They want to look good. They want to, some guys want to look more muscular than others. I was discussing this on Facebook the other day. I mean, I've come across some surveys which show that the largest percentage of steroid users, this actually even surprised me, is not elite athletes, not baseball players, not bodybuilders, but young upward professional men and women in their 30s. In other words, they have no interest in competition, but they're taking steroid programs because they want to look not just muscular, they want to look super muscular. In other words, they want to look big. And my point is that you can actually look that way without taking any drugs if you're very serious. If you diet properly, if you really train hard, you can look tremendous. I mean, to me, the way my mind works, anyone who's resorting to, let's say, anabolic drugs is not satisfied with the natural look. They want something beyond the natural look. So, to me, these people are a little bit on the confused side because they say they don't want to compete, yet they seem to want to have like a competition level body. So I don't understand that. I'm a little confused by that attitude. But that's actually a trend that's happening too. What they don't seem to realize is that a lot of these guys pass information on to each other through various internet forums, and a lot of these guys, they hide behind screen names, and they give out advice to each other of various, sequences of, let's say, anabolic drug use. And I've seen some of these programs that, quite frankly, they frighten me because they're very extensive. Some of these programs are actually more than the pro bodybuilders are using. And these are guys that don't want to compete. And those guys, I say, are putting their future health in jeopardy. I mean, unfortunately, a large percentage of them, if they continue these programs, they are going to experience side effects and problems. If they're going to use the stuff at all, why not use it conservatively where it'll give you a little edge? I mean, if you start to use a elite athlete level cycle of drugs, you're asking for trouble. And because these guys don't know how to use it properly. The elite athletes actually have people working with them that are pharmacologically, let's say, sophisticated and know how to deal with side effects or problems that might crop up. But when you're taking them on your own without medical supervision, you're in unknown territory. Anything can happen. So, no, I don't want. I hope nothing happens to these people, but I fear for them. To be honest with you, I know what these drugs can do, and I think they're, quite frankly, I think they're a little bit crazy.
Okay. So looking at obviously, kind of following on from that, I guess. Obviously now, there's hundreds of different, what we would call, I guess, like natural supplements on the market. And obviously, a lot of them are junk. Some of them are good. I mean, what advice do you have for being able to pick out the ones that definitely work, and obviously not wasting your time with stuff that doesn't work at all?
It's a very good question, Brian. And the truth of the matter is, I supplements and ergogenic aids and various drugs used by athletes. And I can tell you that, as I said earlier, there's a tremendous variety of supplements available today, unlike years ago. And the average bodybuilder or fitness enthusiast can get very confused because there's a lot of, for example, these companies compete with each other, and they have what they call proprietary formulas, where they put everything but the kitchen sink is on the label. All these strange sounding names that nobody really, even most scientists aren't familiar with this stuff. And you have to actually dig through the internet to find out what this stuff is. And I've done that. And what I found is very often a lot of these ingredients that are put in these supplements are based on 1 and 2 animal studies. There's no human data showing efficacy at all, zero. In other words, it might have helped a rat build a little bit of extra muscle. So they extrapolate that and say, well, if it helped a rat build muscle, we're going to throw it into this supplement, and maybe it'll do the same for humans. And the thing is, the problem is that there's no long-term toxicity studies. And there's no efficacy studies, so you don't know if this stuff is doing anything at all. And even worse than that, there's so-called proprietary formulas. Because the companies don't want their competition copying the product, they don't put in exact amounts. So you could be paying like $75 for a can of powder that has, let's say, 40 ingredients, but they don't list the milligram amount. They just list the name, but there's no exact amount, so you have no idea how much is in there. There could be not even enough in there for a fly. You have no idea. You could be spending $70 for a product that probably is worth about $5 at the most. So the thing is, what I advise people, to directly answer your question, is to be very wary of this stuff. And if you want to try a supplement, first of all, contact the company, and if you're not sure of an ingredient, ask the company what this is supposed to do and what the evidence for this product, for this ingredient is. Why is it in the supplement? And a lot of times when people take several supplements at once, they'll ascribe muscle gains or gains in strength to one supplement, when in fact it might be another supplement. Or they'll take a supplement and train harder without realizing it and make some gains, and again wrongly ascribe it to the supplement, when in fact the gains were made because of what they call the placebo effect. They believed that they were gaining that the supplement was doing something, and it did. So that's something to consider too. So in this sense, I would say, if a supplement looks interesting to you and you can afford it, go ahead and try it. But best, if you really want to see if it does anything for you, take it by itself. Don't take it with other supplements. Give it about 4 to 5 weeks to see if you notice anything. And if it doesn't, stop taking it. But the other main point I would want to make about this, the one thing I would tell consumers or bodybuilders or anybody wanting to put muscle on, is to avoid almost all of these so-called testosterone boosting supplements for 2 reasons. First of all, most of them don't work. And second of all, a lot of them contain actual anabolic steroids that were discarded way back in the early 60s that are added to these supplements. A lot of times they're not even on the label. And if you read the journals like I do, you find that there's been a couple of case studies where people have used these are over-the-counter supplements, where people have had, a couple of guys have had liver failure, kidney problems. There's been even a couple of cases of cancer, So honestly, Brian, to put it bluntly, if you're going to take steroids, take the real thing. Don't resort to these things, because I'll tell you something. There's a reason why these old steroids were never released, the ones that are in these supplements, because the drug companies tested them in animals and they found that either they weren't any more effective than the steroids that were already on the market, or B, they caused so much toxicity in the animals that the drug companies, they don't want any litigation, they don't want to be sued, so they discarded them. So these companies dig them out. There's a certain book, it's written by a guy named Julius Vida from 1968. It lists the structure of about 900 different steroid compounds, most of which are in the category I'm talking about, were developed and never used. So if you're a steroid chemist, all you have to do is get a hold of that book. Now that you have the formula and you know how to put it together, you can put it together and make it a supplement. And like I say, I would recommend this stuff to my worst enemy. I actually even took one of them, and it was sent to me, and I was assured that it was safe. And what I didn't know at the time was that it actually contained a designer steroid that wasn't on the label. And I took this supplement, and sure enough, I actually went to the gym. I'm not going to lie to you. I went to the gym, and after about 3 weeks, I started getting this tremendous strength surge. And this was when I was already in my 50s at the time. I'm thinking, my God, what's happening here? It's got to be this supplement. I mean, my leg press poundage went up at like 150 pounds. I remember my incline curls went from 60 to 80 pound incline curl. My arms started growing. I mean, it was amazing. But then the bad thing happened after about 6 weeks. I went for a blood test, and the doctor called me the next day, and he said, Mr. Brainum, he said, we tested you for testosterone, and it doesn't show up. My body was completely shut down on testosterone, and I wound up getting a little testicular shrinkage on it too. And I learned my lesson from this. When I got off it, all the strength just disappeared within about 2 weeks. I was right back. Not only disappeared, but I got weaker than I was before I took this stuff. So that was my experience with the so-called pro hormones. By the way, the supplement I used was removed from the market, so it's not even on the market. That's what happens. See, they come out with these surreptitious anabolic steroid supplements, and they sell it for a while. Then eventually, either somebody gets sick, or the FDA, the Food Drug Administration, they find out about it. It takes a while. They send a letter to the company saying to remove this. It's an illegal drug. So they remove that supplement. Then they go back to the book, find another one, and come out with another. This is the trend that's been going on. And like I say, I strongly advise people. There's one exception. There's an herb called Long Jack or Tongat Ali. It's from Malaysia. It's very safe, and it does seem to increase testosterone. There's been a couple of studies. I've recommended to about maybe 200 guys in the last 10 years. All of them have noticed a definite increase in libido or sex drive, which is an indication of increased testosterone, because testosterone controls the sex drive in both men and women. And it seems to help, and that's the only thing I recommend, because it's safe. And all the other ones, anything that says T booster or increases, keep away from it. Keep away from it. Don't go near it. I do not recommend that. But as for other supplements, if you want to try it, fine. Now, if you said to me, what's a good basic program for a guy who doesn't want to spend a lot of money, I would say to get a whey protein, a good solid whey protein. Basically, if you're training hard, definitely creatine. You might want to throw in beta-alanine. Beta-alanine is kind of like in the optional area. I would say it's best for guys that are really training hard and really getting a big burn in the muscle. The beta-alanine will lower the kind of acids produced in muscle, allow you to train a little bit harder. And then the other thing I would definitely recommend is fish oil, with the only exception being if you eat fatty fish like mackerel, halibut, sardines. If you have that kind of fish, let's say 3 to 4 times a week, you probably don't need to take fish oil. But if you don't eat that quantity of fish, definitely fish oil. In fact, I'd actually recommend fish oil to just about anybody training hard, because what fish oil does, it does a number of things. It actually has minor anabolic effects in muscle, and it also seems to help increase oxygen delivery to muscle so that you can train harder. And there's a couple of other options. For example, one popular category of supplements is the so-called nitric oxide boosters. And the idea behind them is that you take the supplement, usually based on the amino acid arginine. Arginine is the precursor for nitric oxide in the body. Nitric oxide is kind of like a gas, a ephemeral gas. And what it does, it dilates the blood vessels. It has a lot of functions, but it dilates the blood vessels. Therefore, it increases the blood supply, oxygen supply to muscles. That's the ergogenic basis for it. The problem with them, these supplements, is that, arginine in large amounts, it causes gastrointestinal distress. We first became aware of this years ago when arginine was being pushed as a growth hormone booster. The guys that wound up taking 9 grams or more all got either stomach upset or actually got nauseous. So what they realize is that the safe limit before you get to the nausea for most people is about 4 to 5 grams of arginine at one time. So these no boosting supplements, they all contain a limit of about 4.5 to maybe 5 grams of arginine, right? The problem with that is in the scientific studies, to actually get a arginine-related no increase or nitric oxide increase requires 18 grams of arginine, and it's usually given IV, intravenously. So, these no supplements, the arginine is not really doing anything, right? But a lot of these guys will say they do get a pump. Now, why are they getting a pump, an increased pump? Because a lot of the supplements contain simple carbs also besides the arginine. Now, when you ingest simple carbs, you get an elevated insulin secretion. Insulin itself, guess what? It increases nitric oxide. So it's not from the arginine, it's from the insulin that's being kicked out by the simple carb content. See? Now, there is 2 things a bodybuilder or anybody interested in getting the nitric oxide can do and that work very effectively. One of them is to eat foods that contain nitrates, they're called nitrates. And these foods are vegetables. The highest source is beets or beet juice. If you can handle beet juice, it's fantastic. I mean, it increases workout intensity, you won't believe this, by as much as 21%. And again, it's because what happens is they're very high in these nitrates, they call, and when you eat or drink the beet juice, the saliva in your mouth contains enzymes which convert the nitrates into nitrites. The nitrites are then converted by another enzyme as soon as it gets in your gut directly into nitric oxide. And this happens fairly rapidly. So it's a direct conversion, and it bypasses all the liver problems that happen with arginine. See, another problem with arginine is that there's an enzyme in the liver called arginase that tends to break down oral arginine. So a lot of it doesn't even get to be turned into nitric oxide. But when you take the beet or the beet juice, you bypass that system completely. Now, a lot of guys will say to me, well, Jerry, I just don't like eating beets. I don't like eating drinking beet juice. There's still another option. There's an amino acid called citrulline. I was one of the first people to write about this. I wrote about it back in around 96 before anyone ever really heard of it except for chemists. And what citrulline does, citrulline is related to arginine. When you take citrulline orally, it travels to the kidneys. It bypasses the liver problem. It goes to the kidneys, and in the kidneys, it's, again, converted directly into arginine. So it's a very, very sure way of getting a nitric oxide boost. There's a very direct way. And there's no side effects. The only problem with citrulline, it tends to be a little bit on the expense. It's more expensive than arginine, but the good news is it actually works. For those that don't want to take citrulline and you want to, let's say, get it from food sources, the best source is watermelon. Watermelon and watermelon juice are very rich in citrulline. So if you're a connoisseur of watermelon or watermelon juice, you take it before you work out, you're going to get a nitric oxide boost.
Wow. So I believe you've got a blog and is it an ebook you've got as well, which kind of evaluates supplements?
Yes. The ebook is called Natural Anabolics. It's at jerrybrainum.com. One word, jerrybrainum.com. And basically, this book is designed for. Remember, I was talking earlier about. This is actually for the guys I was talking about. It's for somebody that wants to develop muscle and lose fat, but doesn't want to use any drugs whatsoever. So I basically had all the nutritional techniques in there. I have a supplement schedule that you can use. It's a very conservative schedule. It doesn't require a lot of money. So if you follow the principles in that book, and you train. Of course, you have to train hard also. You'll put on a lot of muscle. You'll lose fat with no side effects, no drugs. As far as the blog goes, I have one called Applied. It's called Applied Ergogenics. That's one word. AppliedErgogenics.blogspot.com. That's one of my blogs. I also have blogs at IronmanMagazine.com. And Iron Man Magazine, the Iron Man site, also has some of my previous articles. If you do a search on the site, you'll find some of my articles on there. And in the very near future, I'm coming out with I mentioned that citrulline article. That was actually in a newsletter I had in the late 90s. It was called Applied Metabolics Newsletter. And I'm in the process right now of resurrecting that because I kind of looked around the web and I see what's going on everywhere else. And there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of erroneous articles, and people are being very confused. And I wanted to come out with a very simple, practical, kind of science-based newsletter that I had in the 90s. No advertisements. I'm not pushing any products, just pure information. I feel there's a need for it. I'm also going to expand it in the sense that I'm going to cover nutrition science, exercise science. I'm also going to cover something I didn't back in the 90s, which is longevity research, because a lot of guys like myself over 40, at this stage of the game, we want to stay like kind of young and healthy and vigorous as long as possible. Nobody wants to go decrepit, and there's there's a ton of research that, that's not even, that nobody's really writing about, that I've collected myself for years. That's fascinating if you write it up, and it has to be written up in a way that it's practical and usable and understandable, because some of the stuff is very complex. So I'm going to have that in there, and I'm also going to have stuff for women, because a lot of women have said to me that they feel like they're being ignored in a lot of the magazines, because there's a lot of stuff for men. Well, there's a lot of stuff specific to women that would help them also. So I'm going to have a little bit of stuff on there, women, and I might even have, like we talked about today, some stories about the old days, the so-called golden days of body only goals, because people seem to get a kick out of that too. So I'm going to try and throw in that. So I'm working on that. As soon as I get a website set up for that, I'm going to put it on my Facebook page, and hopefully people like yourself, you can pass the word around and people can subscribe. It'll be a monthly subscription, and I think they'll like it. I think that they'll find it has stuff in there they won't see anywhere else. I can guarantee that, as a matter of fact.
Beautiful. I'll make sure I'll put some links below the video on YouTube so people can find it for you. But yeah, once that new one comes up online, I'll definitely put some links up for you. It sounds awesome.
I appreciate that.
Okay, mate. So we'll come to the infamous last question I always ask everybody.
Okay.
A good man is remembered for who he was. A great man is remembered for what he did. So Jerry, I ask you, what will be your legacy?
Well, my legacy, I'd say, would be two things. First thing in one word would be truth, in the sense that, like I say, I've written about 4,500 articles. I've been writing for about professionally, I've been writing for about 35 years. I've written before that. I've been writing all my life, since I was about maybe 8 years old. But my legacy is truth, in the sense that I've never lied in any of my work. I've tried to be truthful. I've tried to be honest. I've never misled people. And I've tried to educate people, so that would be my first legacy: truth and honesty. And when I tell you something, you can basically count on it. I don't know. I guess this could be said about everyone, but I've always tried to be a good friend to my friends, and as they are to me. And the other thing is a more recent thing is, I hope, is animal welfare, which is a little bit off topic, but you heard my dogs here, but I mean, very much into helping animals, and I hope as long as I live on this earth that I can do as much as I can. I try and save dogs and all kinds of, you name it. I mean, lions, tigers, bears, like the Wizard of Oz line. I try and do everything for every animal. I love animals. They're just the most. They're just loaded with integrity. You know what I mean? When you see an animal, what you see is what you get. And I love that aspect of them. So hopefully as the years go by, I could do more for animals. And so those are my legacies, basically. That I think I was basically a good person. Sounds like I'm already dead. I'm using past tense here, but I got to be careful. But I mean, like I say, truth and honesty is my. I can look anybody in the eye. I've never lied to the public. I've never lied. I've never stretched the truth in any of my articles. So, and believe it or not, a lot of people can't say that. There's been a lot of dishonesty and just absolute nonsense. So I'd say that's my legacy.
Beautiful. Well, just all really left to say is obviously thank you very much for your time. You're more than generous for your time. Obviously, love to have heard your experiences and your views. Obviously, I think it was a big benefit just for me, but everyone can watch as well. So yeah, thanks again for your time. If you want to send through those links to your blog and your book and everything else, I'll make sure everyone sees those as well, because I think they're going to be a good read, definitely. So yeah, thanks again, Jerry. Thanks for your time, my man.
Okay, take care. Nice talking to you, Brian.
You too, my man. Take care.
Take care.